But the basketball at the Y pickup is not the NBA Finals. You know, we mostly want to have fun, and those guys out there, they knew what I did and that I was generally pretty generous and tried to be fair when it came to close calls. But when this guy called me a blanking liar right there in front of everybody, I got kind of defensive. And I slammed the ball down. And I said, look, if it means that much to you, you can have it. But I didn't touch it. And don't question my integrity over something as tiny as a basketball call in a pickup game. The other 8 guys were standing there in shock and amazement. It's like, boy, he really, you know. I'm not prone to outbursts of anger, but, you know, occasionally I guess we all do it. Well, I'm glad you're here today as we kick off a series we're calling March Madness. Now, most of you know what March Madness is. It's a big NCAA basketball tournament. It's going to start in a week or so. Unfortunately, this year there's not as much excitement around here because OSU is not going to be in it. OU is barely going to make it. OU's women's basketball team is really down this year. So instead, there's a different kind of March Madness for us to focus on over the next few weeks. I'm going to do a talk on what anger can do to you, how to be good and mad. I'm going to talk about when you're mad at God. But today we're starting things off with the roots of rage. Where does it come from? And before I get started, let me just ask you, do you see yourself as an angry person? Do you have a problem with anger? Or what if we ask family members of yours or coworkers, what would they say? Would they say, yeah, they kind of have an anger problem? Do you find yourselves regularly feeling those feelings of resentment and hostility towards certain people? Maybe even daydreaming scenarios of getting revenge against them? Maybe occasionally, just beyond your own belief, you just explode in a fit of anger. Or maybe you're the kind of person who tends to internalize it. Sometimes have you felt rage that you just wondered, like, boy, that doesn't seem like me? Well, let's do a little audience participation, all right? What is something that really makes you angry? And just be a few words, okay? You know, like how the Catholics go in that little box and they tell the priests the things they've done wrong? This is like that, except we're in a bigger box and more people listening. But besides that, it's just the same, all right? So what is something that really, maybe a certain situation that you remember, or just in general, things that make you angry? Anybody? Just, yeah?
It makes me angry when I leave things out around the house and Russ puts it somewhere and I can't find it again.
That's true. But I say, like, why, if you leave it out, then if you don't leave it out, I won't move it. I won't put it, I won't.
He just throws it like in a drawer.
That's true. But somebody besides my wife, Donna, yes.
It makes me angry when you pick stuff up and don't put it in the right place.
Quit it. Okay, somebody on this side of the room. Somebody that doesn't have an axe to grind against me. Yes, right on it.
Being lied to.
Huh?
Being lied to.
Being lied to. A couple people said that on there. Jennifer, did you have one back there?
My mother.
Your mother makes you angry?
She is what you talked about on the not so good of a child, but we let her anger.
I know others of you here grew up in homes that there was just a tremendous amount of anger, and when you're a little bitty kid, you don't know how to deal with it. You feel like, is it my fault? Did I do something wrong? And a lot of times you didn't. They're just, you know, they have problems. Marty?
I was just going to say inconsiderate drivers.
Well, that's a good one.
Not a rude driver, just inconsiderate when they're blocking a driveway that somebody can go in and out. You know what I mean?
Anybody else? Something that just for you tends to make you really angry, buddy? Yeah. Yeah, Lynn. Yeah, that's stupid. No, you can defend yourself. That was anyway. That was a bad joke. You can defend yourself, though, Lynn. Yes. When you're I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that back there, Cliff. Anybody else? Something that really gets on your nerves, Kathy? You know, I for most of my life, I didn't feel anger. I don't recall, flying off the handle too much, but about a dozen years ago, some stuff happened where there were a few people said things about me that weren't true, that they knew weren't true. It wasn't that they were accidentally passing on misinformation. They knew it wasn't true, and I was like, that just shocked me and dumbfounded me. And I found myself feeling a kind of anger and resentment that I had never experienced before, a level of it that I had a hard time dealing with it. Well, experts today say 1 in 5 Americans has what they call an anger management problem. According to FBI statistics, in 2017, there were 16,425 homicides in the United States. You'd think there'd be more than 16,000, but that's what there were. And the most common reason was arguments occurring within the home. 28% of homicides in 2017 stemmed from arguments at home. Only 7% were related to gang killings, 28% from arguments at home. Domestic violence, they say, is the reason for 22% of divorces. They say 79% of children who show violent behavior have witnessed themselves violent behavior at home between their parents. The phrase road rage officially entered the English language in 1997 as more and more people became so angry while driving that they would scream and yell, sometimes even stop and get out of their cars and physically assault other drivers, and occasionally even shoot and kill somebody. Then air rage is the new term to describe people who show fits of anger and violence on airplanes. But it seems like it's everywhere, in our homes, in our workplaces, in our schools, at sporting events. Now, in a moment, we're going to look at kind of our key passage for today, which is from Ephesians chapter 4. But here are a few other things the Bible has to say. Proverbs 29:22 says, an angry man stirs up dissension and commits many sins. Ecclesiastes 7:9, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. James 1:20, a man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. And even though most of us know those kinds of things, we still sometimes struggle with anger, struggle with resentment, struggle with being easily provoked. And today's question is why? Where does it come from for most of us? What are the roots of our rage, our bitterness, our volatility? And I just want to make a list, 10 things. Number 1, we become angry when we get hurt. All of us here probably have hit our thumb with a hammer at some time. How do you react? Do you say, why, that's rather discomforting? When we get hurt, we kind of react more seriously than that. We usually say other things. But we also become angry when we're hurt emotionally, not just physically, when we're hurt emotionally. When we feel a sense of rejection, or someone says something negative or critical or unfair about us. And when we get hurt, what's our natural reaction? We want to strike back. We want to hurt them. You hurt me, I want to hurt you. This week I read some things where actual marriage counselors have actually heard husbands and wives say to each other in marital counseling. One man said, you make me wish I had a lower IQ so I could enjoy your company. Woman said, my husband has all the personality of a dial tone. There was a woman who said, I guess I had to marry you to find out how stupid you are. To which the husband responded, you should have known that the moment I asked you to marry me. We hurt people that we love, or at least maybe used to love. But when we're hurt, we tend to want to hurt that person who did something to us. A second cause of anger is jealousy. That was what was behind the very first ever homicide. Cain struck and killed his own brother in a fit of jealousy. Someone at work gets the promotion that you feel you deserved, and your jealousy turns into anger and then resentment. Someone has a nicer home, a newer car, a bigger, better, whatever, something that you want. Maybe you struggle with your weight while somebody else that you know eats like a pig and is always thin, and you just resent that. You don't understand it. Maybe a family member is always rubbing it in your face that while they're vacationing in Hawaii, you're out setting up a tent at Lake Dirty Bird, and we're in Hawaii. And it's like, after a while, it gets on your nerves. And so jealousy often turns into bitterness or anger. Third is the temperament factor. Now, some of you are familiar with the 4 temperament types that we talk about occasionally. Which is the most likely of the 4 temperament types to have anger issues? It would be the choleric person. You know, a young child falls and scrapes his knee, and his choleric dad says, "You better stop crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about." And the tragic thing is when the choleric temperament person has no awareness that he or she has anger problems, and all the damage they do to the people around them, and sometimes they're almost unaware of it. A fourth possible cause or explanation as to why some people have so much anger in their lives is due to their upbringing. Children who grow up around people who have bad tempers, who yell and scream and slam doors, those children are much more likely to display those same kinds of behaviors than children who grow up in more peaceful homes. Also, kids whose parents divorce are oftentimes angry and hurt over that. They may not realize that that's the cause of it, but often that is the cause of some of the anger they feel. And in extreme cases, children who grew up with abuse, whether physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal or emotional abuse, far too often turn into bitter, resentful, and angry adults through no fault of their own. And they spend a lifetime oftentimes trying to overcome just this undercurrent of anger and resentment in their lives. Number 5 on the list, sometimes the circumstances of life can just push us over the edge. Now, one of the situations where tempers tend to wear a little thin is on what they call family vacations. Now, as a parent, when you plan this wonderful experience of fun and bonding from your family, you're just sure that in the minds of your children in the back seat, they're thinking things like, "Wow, how generous of Mom and Dad to take us on vacation." Hey, we say, I'm going to be so compliant. I'm not going to argue or get in a fight. I'm not going to complain about anything. I'm not going to spill chocolate milkshake all over the carpet back here. Is that how it works in the mind of a child on vacation? I don't think so. Before even leaving town, they're fighting over who gets to sit by the window and who hit who, and I'm telling, and then there's tension in the front seat. Dad is just about ready to blow a gasket after having to pack the car, get everyone in, and now bickering and fighting is going on. And after a couple of 100 miles of taunts and tattling and unscheduled bathroom breaks, what is the deal here? Is that me? I think it is. Dad starts losing control. And I remember this from my childhood. My dad driving, one hand on the steering wheel and the other hand, just swinging at whoever possibly back there, And he just, his eyes are bulging out and blood veins are sticking out. But whether it be at school, at work, in our neighborhoods, at an OU game, at the golf course, driving, the circumstances of life can conspire to really bring out our anger. Number 6 is injustices. When we feel mistreated, as some of us mentioned, when we feel mistreated, it makes us angry. When our children are being mistreated, or we think they're being treated unfairly, it's hard to keep those feelings of anger at bay, isn't it? But Jesus sometimes became outraged at the hard-hearted religious leaders of his day for how they would use and abuse people for their own twisted purposes. That's what's called righteous anger. Why are so many people these days angry? I think another factor, they say, is media exposure. They say that the average child today, by the time he or she turns 18, will have watched some 250,000 hours of television. That's between ages like 3 and 18, about 4 or 5 hours of TV a day on average. And in that 250,000 hours of television, they will have watched some 200,000 acts of violence, around 10,000 murders. And that doesn't have to do with the anger and violence on movies and DVDs and video games and music. And the level of violence and hostility in our society is seen more and more on social media. Political anger. I mean, people just get so worked up about things in there, and it's just growing and growing exponentially. And, when you've had that your entire life growing up, the past 20, 30, 40 years, all around you, it just has an effect on all of us. And we tend to become more angry and volatile and hostile. Another cause for the madness and meanness that we see today is just plain frustration. Let's say you drive to your bank's ATM and you put your card in and it doesn't work. So you try it again, it doesn't work. Now, if you're having an otherwise pretty good day, you go, yeah, and you just go on. However, if you're running late to work, or your kids are fighting in the back seat, or the car in front of you took forever, you felt like ramming them from the back, then when the ATM doesn't work, your frustration just boils over. And you might scream at your children, you might throw your debit card across the car, you might screech your tires out of the parking lot. It's the accumulated frustration that turned you from a mild-mannered mom or dad into kind of raving lunatic in just a matter of seconds. A ninth factor to add to our list is just being angry with yourself. You know, when life doesn't go like we wish that it would, some people get where they don't like who they are, they hate their life, the circumstances of their life. When people feel like life is unfair and they just got cheated in different ways, which sometimes is true, that internal anger is sure eventually to overflow outwardly and start to be directed at the people around us. And number 10, the pressures of life sometimes just become too much. And while some people withdraw when they become angry, or maybe they get depressed, or they try to run from their problems, or try to drink away their problems, some try to find renewed strength to keep going through their problems, but some people just boil over in anger. And by the pressures of life, I mean things like financial pressures, difficult people that you have to work with. Maybe the house is a mess, or the kids are sick, or relatives or family members are getting on your nerves. Or your computer's running slow, or you've lost your cell phone, or you show up for Valentine's Day evening dinner and it's a 45-minute wait at the restaurant. You know, or someone drove your car like my kids do, and I get in it the next time and it's on empty with no lights on. It's like, you guys, when you borrow my car, don't leave, you know, it just drives you nuts. Well, that's my little confession now. I'm trying to sneak that one in. That wasn't actually on my notes here. I just thought of them, Megan and Michael. Anyway, well, I don't know if any of those things describe, you know, why maybe you sometimes struggle with anger. But Ephesians chapter 4 really speaks to these issues in some very clear and I think compelling ways. First, there are 3 positive descriptions of anger, and then 3 things that we need to avoid when anger tends to take control. But the first positive one is, number 1, anger is a normal emotion. Ephesians 4:26 says, in your anger, do not sin. It's not saying it's a sin to become angry. It's possible to be upset and mad, and even in a good way. Anger is one of our God-given emotions. You know, the Bible says God displayed anger, as did Jesus. However, we sometimes see anger as all bad. We go into our children. If they become too angry, you know, we get on them. Sometimes we feel guilty because we feel or express anger. And so a lot of people, I think Christians especially, repress their feelings of anger. They just push them down. They internalize them. But that can lead to a lot of things, like headaches, ulcers, insomnia, eating disorders, depression. But according to the Bible, anger is a normal and healthy emotion when expressed, you know, correctly. Number 2, anger is kind of like a warning light built in by God. It's kind of like one of those warning lights on your dashboard that lets you know that there's a problem. It's going to become a bigger problem if you don't deal with it. So when you feel anger starting to well up inside of you, think to yourself, uh-oh, I need to be careful here. I need to proceed with caution. And the third thing, anger needs to be resolved. While anger is a healthy and normal emotion, it's not designed to be what they call a permanent emotion. Check this out. Here's where Jesus got so outraged, you remember, that he drove the money changers out of the temple. But then notice the last part. It says, the blind and lame came to him at the temple, and he healed them. Still at the temple. It was at the temple when he ran out the money changers, and while still at the temple, Jesus was able to change gears, change moods, and go from righteous anger to loving compassion. Now, for us non-divine people, that's hard to do. We have a hard time of letting go of our anger and being able to shift anytime quickly into a more compassionate mode. You know, something really upsetting happens to us, and we let it ruin our whole day. And sometimes it happens at work, and then we come home and take it out on people who had nothing to do with what happened at work. And we take it out on them. Anger causes us to become the kind of persons that we really don't want to be. And oftentimes causes us to say and do things that are really not who we want to be. Which leads us right into the third bad thing that happens when anger takes control of you, and that is, or the three bad things that happen. And first, unresolved anger opens the door for evil. When you're under the influence of anger, you say and do things you normally would not say and do. You know, you might take out your frustrations and hostilities on innocent people. You might say hurtful words that you later regret. You might even throw things, break things, slam things. You might even physically hurt somebody. Some of you may remember the television show The Incredible Hulk. The main character, a scientist named Dr. David Banner, and most of the time he was a very nice, mild-mannered guy. But when he became angry, he changed. And he would say, "Don't make me angry. You know, you wouldn't like me when I become angry." And if the person ignored their warning, he would look like this. And the whole series was built around Dr. Banner's search for a cure. He didn't like what anger was doing to him, but seemed like he couldn't stop it from happening. But anger can turn normal, calm, loving Christian people into a temporary monster. It can cause us to say and do evil, hurtful things. Number two, unresolved anger, when molded into words, can cause enormous damage. You all know the saying, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." That's not really true, is it? Words do hurt, especially the kinds of words that we say when we're under the influence of anger. People fly into a rage and say some of the most hurtful, damaging words to the people that we say we love the most. Lethal words leave long-lasting scars on the souls of other people. And finally, a third thing that happens when anger takes control, it distances us from God. It grieves the heart of God. It creates kind of a chasm between ourselves and God. It prevents us from being the kind of person that God wants us to be. Which is why the scriptures tell us then in Ephesians, get rid of all bitterness. Get rid of the rage. Get rid of the brawling, the hostility, the malice. And replace it, like Jesus did, with kindness and compassion and forgiveness. I do want to say Jesus was righteous anger when he did what he did. You know, the movie Forrest Gump, one of my all-time favorites, modern classic. And like all classics, it has some really memorable lines. Like one of the most familiar ones is Mama always said, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. He said, stupid is as stupid does. I'm not exactly sure what that meant, but stupid is as stupid does. One of my favorite scenes is when Bubba and they're cleaning the floor, and he's talking about all the different kinds of shrimp that they have down, you know, coconut shrimp, popcorn shrimp. You can barbecue it, broil it, baste it, saute it, fried, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I think that's about it. I like the scene when they're in the White House and President Johnson asked Forrest Gump where he was shot. He goes, in the buttocks, sir. I like that one. Or when when Forrest says, Mama says these was magic shoes. They could take me anywhere. Or when Forrest would get kind of upset, he would say, that's all I have to say about that. Remember when his good friend was dying and he said, Bubba was my best good friend. But I think the most poignant quote from that movie came when Forrest and Jenny returned to her childhood home after her father had died. It was a dilapidated, abandoned house at that point, and she reflected on the sexual abuse she had endured from her father there as a child. She was overcome by rage, if you remember that scene, and she began throwing rocks hysterically at the house until she finally fell to the ground in exhaustion. And Forrest Gump said to her, sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. You know, many of us have struggled with anger in our lives. And some of that anger has been justified and some of it hasn't. Yet unresolved anger leaves us crying out for just more rocks. And we use those rocks to hurt ourselves and to hurt other people and do things we often regret. Sometimes, again, it's understandable, but it's not the best thing. The rage never seems to get satisfied in some people, and so inner peace can never be found. For Dr. David Banner, he never was able to find a cure for his transformation into an angry monster. But there is a cure. However, you will have to come back next week to hear it, because we are out of time. So let's stand. We'll have our closing prayer. You guys did a good job. Let's hear it for those guys rescuing the PowerPoint for Release the Talk. Thank you, guys. We appreciate that. Sorry for all the stress you guys went through with the crashed computer. Lord, I'm grateful today to get to talk about a subject matter that isn't discussed very often in a positive way or a constructive way in our culture. And that as churches, as Christians, we often don't even acknowledge the idea of anger and what it can do to us, what it can do to the people around us. So God, I'm grateful today to have the opportunity to open the Scriptures and just to see the practical wisdom that has stood the test of time because it's true and because it works. And Lord, those of us today who maybe haven't been inflicted with a childhood of anger and violence, today we would just express our gratitude to you. That we didn't deserve it, but we were fortunate in that regard. Lord, for those who grew up in really difficult homes that were filled with shouting and screaming and slamming and even physical violence, Lord, I pray today that they would have reassurance from you to know that those things were not their fault. They were just innocent victims standing by. But those things have probably impacted their lives, maybe even to today. I pray, God, that they would have the courage and the strength from you to deal with things that others of us never even had to think about until they come to a point of healing and transformation and forgiving people who brought that into their lives and overcome it themselves. Lord, help us to understand what righteous anger is, to recognize injustices in our world, and to take appropriate action when needed, and to stand up when we need to for other people and even for ourselves. Lord, most of the anger that we deal with is not of the righteous variety. And so today, God, we want to, as the song said, we want to cry out for your mercy and your grace and your forgiveness and your help to transform us into the kind of people that you want us to be, and deep down the kind of people that we long to be also. So, Lord, we're grateful for a chance to gather together as a part of our church family today, and pray that you protect everyone as we travel, and help us as we go out this week, God, and over the coming weeks, to really think about this issue and say, by the time this series is done, there's some changes that need to happen in my life with God's help. And to commit ourselves to saying, I am open. I'll humble myself, and I will soften my heart, and maybe God could use this to change some things that need to be altered in my life long term. We'll pray all those things in Jesus' name and in his strength to help us to do this. Amen. All right, everybody, thanks for coming out, braving the treacherous weather